Yep.
2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Our partner in crime and head coach on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation, of course, is Brian Billick. He's going into the Ring of Honor this week, and it has allowed me, and I tell you, when I found out about this, I was circling dates and circling this week and thought I'd be talking all this football strategy and Browns and Ravens and all this stuff. And as it turns out, I'm just happy to be talking about Coach going in and telling some old war stories with some old friends. I've known Mike Smith since back when he was the stats guy on Brian Billick's staff back in 2001 as a defensive assistant and all around. I was going to call you the Swiss Army knife of all things Ravens in Super Bowl 35. Of course, if you know, Mike Smith has gone on to defensive coordinate the Jaguars as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons for a long time. Always great to have you on, Coach Mike Smith. I don't think I've ever had you on. We weren't doing X's and O's. You're not even watching football. You're fishing on Sunday, so good for you, my man.
Well, it's been a good fall thus far. Those fish are getting a beating every time I've gone out, so we're having a good time. Nestor.
All your life, football. Turning it off. I mean, maybe you envisioned that one day you wouldn't have film to watch or coaches or things that you needed to do that were responsibilities at your level over the last 2 decades. What has this exhale been from you? Because, Marvin's gone back and he's running around with Arizona State and Herm. Brian can't stay away. He's still doing NFL Network. I mean, you literally have gone sort of cold turkey here, right?
I have, and it's been fun. And I've had to tell some folks that think I'm watching it that I'm not watching it. I get guys call and say, "Hey, did you watch it? Or can I send you some film? I want to look at this, or remember when we did that?" I'm going, guys, I've slept a long time since we did that, and I've got. It's been enjoyable to spend time with my family and kind of put football on the back burner. And I know it's tough for some guys.
Well, you wonder what that's going to be like for you, but it has not been tough for you, huh? I mean, is there an itch at all Sunday mornings or not? Doesn't even notice.
Well, there's an itch, but I scratch it, but I scratch it in other ways. Like I said, we spent all day yesterday fishing. And, didn't see a score until 11 o'clock last night.
All right. Well, I mean, you got a big week this week, and people are going to be telling you stories and remembering stories of Brian. And no secret, you are Brian's brother-in-law. You are married to sisters. That was never a secret back in the day, and certainly wasn't a secret when he was in meeting rooms calling Falcons games back in the day with Brenneman and whatnot. But for you with Brian, and I guess you get asked about this sometimes, but probably not a lot publicly in some sort of an emotional way to what he meant to your career and your friendship and your family part of this and all the family coming in this week. You're going to be the only family member I have on this week. I'm not calling son-in-laws to talk about him this week. So this is a big deal for the Billick family this week behind all this, isn't it?
It is, and it's so deserving. Brian has done so much for Ravens organization and the area. As you know, Brian is very giving of his time and money, and he's done so many great things there in the Baltimore area. And it's going to be a great, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of people that he hasn't seen in a long time. And it's going to be an honor to see his name go up on that ring with a lot of other great Raven people.
Brian's weird like that, right? Like I've never seen Brian come out and wave to the crowd or accept the trophy that wasn't the Lombardi. Like literally, right? And even then, he wasn't as attached to any of it, right? Like he was right back in the office coaching the next day, the whole deal. The part where he steps out and takes a bow, he's commanded rooms. You've seen him give a million speeches as the coach, as your brother-in-law, as your friend, as a mentor, as an ear, and all that stuff. This is a little weird for Brian, right? I mean, have his name in lights and all. Brian's almost a little uncomfortable with all that, isn't he?
Well, that's just the way his makeup, and I believe he is. But he deserves it. He did so much for that organization. We all know what season it was. Almost a Cinderella season for everybody involved, and especially the fans and the Festivus thing that we did, which he did. And I think the one thing that people forget about that season is Brian had to work around so many things that season. Offensively, we struggled. He kept the team together, and he was a master at doing that. And I learned a lot from him, and he helped me in so many ways personally. But I'm not the only one. There's Marvin Lewis. There's Jack Del Rio. There's Rex Ryan. All of us learned how to be a head coach by mimicking some of the things that Brian Billick did, and he was way ahead of his time in terms of how he put together a practice week and how he worked that team.
So much is made of your family relationship and marrying sisters and still being married all these years, and you'll all be down on the field this weekend when the Browns come in here, and hopefully Lamar's doing what he's doing. Give us the background of you and Brian, because I think maybe one time I asked you about this, but I don't even know, and it might not even have been on the radio because you and I have been close over the years. Maybe it was at lunch sometime at a combine or something. Tell me about the day you met Brian Billick, because you both were at San Diego State at the same time. He sort of predated you being there. So you come in and you meet this young, tall, former tight end, right? And you're contemporaries to some degree at that point in your lives, right?
Absolutely. I came to San Diego State with the defensive staff, and Brian was there 1 year ahead of my arrival. And you knew right away that he was very smart, and he really understood the game of football, and he had spent time with Bill Walsh, and I was intrigued with Bill Walsh. So anytime I had a chance to talk with him about Bill Walsh, we talked about Bill Walsh. But I think you know this story, and Brian has told it, and he's told it many times. He introduced me to my wife, his wife, and he tells a story, and it's not true, but he embellishes it. He said he had to pay me to take my wife out, and of course that's so far from the truth. But we learned a lot, and we worked together. And my time at San Diego State with him was probably the best time for me as a coach in terms of learning, because I learned something different. I learned the way that Bill Walsh had done it, and Brian, of course, worked for Bill Walsh prior to working at San Diego State. And then we went in different ways. And when Brian got the job in Baltimore, he'd asked me a time or two to come up to Minnesota when he was there, and I was very comfortable where I was at. And when he got the job in Baltimore, he said, "Hey, this is the last time I'm asking, are you coming?" And I said, "We'll be here." And
well, you made a life at Tennessee Tech, right? Most people haven't even heard of Tennessee Tech, right? Like that was your life. And I've talked to John Harbaugh about this, and John Harbaugh said he was so happy with his Cincinnati job when he had it in college that he and his wife made a life there and just decided that that might be their lives, that they were so happy, and so many people describe that, and then there's that next thing that happens that I'm sure at that point in your life, if you thought, if I become the Tennessee Tech coach and that's what I do that's a great life as a football coach, right? At that point in your life.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that. There were some really good coaches in that league. John Harbaugh coached in it. Rob Ryan, we were contemporaries in that league for a number of years. And you're right. Sometimes it's not, the grass isn't greener on the other pasture in the other field, and you feel good about where you were at. But the opportunity to join the Ravens and get an opportunity to coach in the NFL, Brian afforded that to me, and I owe him a lot. And of course, we got involved in a lot of discussions with a lot of good coaches, and Brian put the staff, very, very strong and very, very organized. And he led that team to, and willed that team to that Super Bowl win in 2000.
Well, Coach, by the way, Mike Smith joining us here, brother-in-law of Brian Billick, longtime Atlanta Falcons head coach, now fishing somewhere on a mountain in Tennessee and making his way back here this week to celebrate Brian Billick's honor and Ring of Honor. When you go back to what you found when you got here 20 years ago, and I think in retrospect, we'll talk about Brian as being the great offensive coordinator of the Vikings and the head coach of the Super Bowl Ravens and the great players, and now in the Ring of Honor and all that. But the one thing that will not be on the professional, in the wins and losses was how many coaches he chose and how good he was at hiring and believing in coaches, whether it was Marvin Lewis, whom he'd never met and made the defensive coordinator, whether it was Rick Neuheisel, who came on this week and said he had never met Brian Billick and had never, other than a cup of coffee as a backup quarterback, hadn't really been in NFL buildings. And Brian became so enamored with sort of the sandpaper of coaching, right? Like, Brian did not want apostles and everybody at all to believe in what he believed in. He would almost say, I want, people to MF me. He really believed in sort of disharmony within coaching to have differing points of view, and not everybody wants that. People want harmony on their staff. You put together a lot of staffs, right, Mike?
Yes, and have been involved with a lot of them. And that's one thing I learned from Brian is that you want to make sure that you're challenging everybody in the organization all the time. And I think that's one of the things that Brian was great at, was putting together a staff that was going to be challenging for everybody. And I think it made everybody in the organization better. I can remember Shaq Harris, who was there with Ozzie Newsome. He talked about how he would hear us scrimmaging as a staff, and that meant that there was probably some raised voices. And there was a great thing about the staffs that Brian put together and the staffs that I were on. We always would have great conversations. We would have opportunities to say what our opinion was, and there might be some MFing going on back and forth. But at the end of the meeting, the one thing we did is we were all in, and we were going to go in there and sell that. And Brian did a great job of leading the coaching staff, more so than leading the team, leading the players. And
there's no statistic for that, right? But the Billick tree, you being a strong member of that, the number of head coaches it birthed in the aftermath, and also a bunch of young assistants that are still very involved in the NFL as well as the college game, that really, I think, for the people inside the industry, that's what Brian's known for as much as the Super Bowl, right?
Absolutely. We mentioned the guys that went on. You can imagine there's probably, you have to look far and wide for a guy that was a head coach as long as Brian to put out so many coaches that went on to be head coaches, went on to be coordinators that are still in the game right now. Vic Fangio was on Brian's staff. Brian had Vic on his staff as well. That's another head coach in the NFL.
Getting them all. Mike Smith is here. We're going to be joined by a bunch of his colleagues, including Jack Del Rio, Marvin Lewis, Rick Neuheisel, a bunch of others, to talk about Brian Billick as he goes into the Ring of Honor. Our partner on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation. Don't forget, it's a huge week for Living Classrooms, too. Maritime Magic is Friday night. Go to livingclassrooms.org. If you want to do something awesome for a great cause to support the city, support young people in the city, Living Classrooms is a great way to do that this week. And also support us here at WNST on behalf of Brian's commitment to the things we've done here. All right, so let's go back to 2001 or maybe even 1999. What did you find when you got here, Smitty? Like, Brian came in and his name's on the billboards, which I'm sure you and your wife and sister-in-law found to be kind of funny before he had won a game. But you found this young kid named Ray Lewis, and Marvin had managed to corral Rod Woodson and bring him in here. And Tony Saragusa was brought in by Ted Marchibroda, and Michael McCrary's around. And here comes Sam Adams, and there's Rob Burnett over there. And these young kids like Jamie Sharper and Kim Herring, and there's Ozzie Newsome drafting these guys. I could put myself back there 20 years ago and say, hey, we can kiss the ring. We got a trophy. We had a parade. You went on and had your career, and Brian went on and did his. But you didn't know any of that when you showed up out in Owings Mills back in 99, did you?
Absolutely not. That's the great thing about the NFL is on paper it may look one way the year before, and then the next year it's a completely different result. And Brian put together, I think, a fantastic staff, that first staff. And like you said, he'd not met Marvin, but he brought in Rex, Jack, Steve Schaefer, and myself. And you can imagine we were going through tape of the previous season. They didn't have a great season, and it challenged Marvin. And Marvin was so good about taking everybody's ideas in. And everybody knew that Marvin was in charge, but he was very, very good at listening to the staff members in terms of input into the game. And Brian must have had a inkling that that's the way it was going to be. And then, of course, on that was Brian's strength. He's coming off that great year with the Minnesota Vikings in '98 when they just missed going to the Super Bowl with the missed field goal. And that was a strong staff that he'd put together. And then the players Ozzie put together, there were some darn good players in football, and they were too. And I think that had a lot to do with it because Brian was able to work the team through that drought that we went through where we didn't score any points. And the defense and the offense stayed together. Brian used humor. Brian used statistics. He used all the things that the head coach needs to do to keep that team together. And you see more and more teams that have failures early on, they blow up. And that's not what happened in 2000. And, when we got down to Tampa, you were down there. You knew it. We just had the confidence that no matter what was going to happen, we were going to win that football game. And Nestor, I think I told you this at lunch one time. Shoot, we could have played 12 quarters in that ball game, and they wouldn't have scored. Not on that defense.
Well,
but they weren't going to score on defense.
20 years later, we still, eat off of that here, and we had another parade here with Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh. But for someone like you that spent your entire life dedicated to football, and you're now out, thankfully, fishing after all of this stuff, that Super Bowl night, there's nothing like that, right? Like all these years later, it doesn't dim, and Coach always says something that he has a joke from his speeches. They say they can't take it away from you, but that doesn't stop them from trying. All these years later. But to think about that night in the totality of your career, which appears to be over as a football coach here, that's it, right? There's only that, and everything else is all the other hours and everything that went into it. You at least got to do it one time. Same thing with Marvin, right?
Absolutely. That night, you'll never forget. The game, it was so surreal. Like I said, we played 12 quarters that night, and I don't think they ever would have scored on us. And then the after party that went way, way too long. We all had a great time. You don't even need to have pictures because it's so vivid in your mind. It was great for the Modell family. It was great for Baltimore, and it was great for all the participants. And it's something that nobody will take away. And like Brian said, they may try, but they can't do it.
I'm looking forward to seeing you, the entire Billick clan, all the kids, grandkids, little skiers that he has, out there on the mountainside and all that stuff. And, of course, Living Classroom's big weekend at Maritime Magic as well as our head coach, Brian Billick, goes into the Ring of Honor. Mike Smith joining us here from high on a hilltop somewhere in Tennessee. Tell everybody what you're doing with your life because a little update. Everybody in Atlanta wants to know Tampa here, places that you coached, and you just decided you're going to go fish, and that's it. I can't even talk to you about Lamar Jackson because you did not see him play this week, and that's fine.
I did not see him play. I can't speak to any thing that happened in the NFL. But we're spending time doing lots of fishing and golfing, relaxing, hiking, and, watching the leaves getting ready to turn to the beautiful colors of orange and yellow here in the high mountains East Tennessee and Western North Carolina.
All right. Well, you got to get your authorship back up. Start working on the football A to Z's. Get your next book out. All right. And I will be on the. I'll have the ear out for all the things you're doing. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Come get yourself a crab cake, Mike. You're back in Baltimore. All right.
Oh, we will. There's no doubt about it. We're going to have some crab, and we're going to have a great time, and it's going to be an honor to be there to see Brian's name go up. Well deserved.
All in the family. Mike Smith, assistant on the 2001 Super Bowl 35 champions and longtime head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and brother-in-law of Brian Billick, in town this weekend to honor Coach. We're going to be talking about it all week. Luke's out in Owings Mills. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and always out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. We're doing Baltimore Positive this week. Howard County Executive Calvin Ball will be talking about education and busing and controversy and all of that with us at State Fair on Thursday morning. Also, make sure you hear Brandon Scott, our current Baltimore City Council president and mayoral candidate, out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, as well as at Baltimore Positive this week. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, getting after the Cleveland Browns this week, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.